listening to Tech.radio. You can catch us on the web at Tech.radio, the domain name, as well as on this station every Monday at 6 p.m., KOPN 89.5 FM in Columbia, Missouri, United States. We scrape the web for the latest and greatest news in technology and science and bring them to you each week. And this week, again, we have a special guest, Brad.
I'm here.
Yep. And let's go ahead and roll into some stories. This first story it's a couple of stories, but both very related. CNBC recently did a poll asking people that are working at home whether they wanted to stay that way. And it appears that of this poll asking more than 1,200 people around the United States, 43% of them wanted to work remotely more often, if not full-time. And about 20% of them said that their employer is considering it, which kind of rolls into a very closely related story. Twitter just last week has basically said to their employees, even when the COVID-19 pandemic thing is over, you can still work from home. There, of course, there's caveats to that. There's certain people that have to go to work, like IT people that work with actual servers and that type of thing. But basically, they're willing to become a remote company.
Okay, so on the first one, with a survey like this, first of all, is that at all surprising? I mean, is there a part of that is? I mean, I suppose there's a lot of quarantine fatigue where people like to get back to a regular schedule, but I don't find it surprising at all that people would want to have the flexibility to work from home more often.
Yeah. Well, the number sounds right to me, about 43%. This is kind of like gets back to the big discussion we've had in the past about open office plans. Some people think they're fantastic because they're very social individuals and they like the feel of being able to hear all your neighbors all the time. And some people find that, frankly, just so distracting they can't get anything done.
Right.
And
yes.
so some people it's a nightmare and some people it's heaven.
Right.
And I won't say it's half, but I've heard people from both sides of the fence on that one. And I'm not surprised about this one either. One of the things I like about working from home, because I'm right now a full-time contractor from home, and have been actually even before the pandemic started. It's nice to be able to have your own spot where you can just concentrate on one thing and not have people emailing you and texting you and coming by your cube and asking you questions.
Well, and one of the things that I think there was a quote in one of these stories with somebody saying that, they like the flexibility that they could, put in a load of laundry or start dinner cooking, or, instead of when you're working from an office, it's a very structured thing. You're at home and then you drive to the office and you work at the office and then you leave and maybe run errands and then you're back home. So you have to kind of compartmentalize your life. And when you're working from home, some people struggle because it's, your dirty dishes bleed into your work day. But other people seem to integrate it where they can, I can take 20 minutes and exercise, or I can, put in a load of laundry, or I can start dinner or something like that. And now their life seems to have a little bit more flexibility or a better pace to it.
Yeah. Well, this is very similar to most people's college years. I mean, when you go to college, yes, you've got certain hours where you have to actually show up at class to see your professor, but the bulk of your time in college is spent on your own, studying and doing homework and doing research and writing papers. And there's quite a bit, you're spending more time outside the class working than you are actually in the class.
This is true.
And some people thrive on that and some people hate it. Actually, I was thinking about this the other day, not related to this story, but I was vaguely considering going back to grad school one day. But as soon as I started thinking that, I think, you know what? It's taken me over 10 years to stop thinking I have homework to do. If I go back to college, I'm putting myself right back into that mindset. Like, because when you're in college, you're never finished.
That's true. Yep.
Which is actually the problem I'm having right now. Because normally I work remote, but that's different from working home. I'm actually working home right now, which is different because I have a local office. Well, you know that one.
Yep.
I've got a local office here in town, in which I love because that means I can drive literally 3 minutes to my office and be doing nothing but work, and it creates that separation from home. But I also don't have to deal with a workplace because it's my office. It's not a company office.
That physical separation is both good and bad, and I think that's why I wasn't really surprised at the 43% number, because like you said, some people thrive in that environment and some people struggle, and I think that's probably accurate. But I want to change the subject briefly to the Twitter story.
Yeah.
Because didn't Twitter, they used to have a high number of remote workers, and then like last year, the year before, wasn't it Twitter that pulled them all back in and eliminated all work from home?
I think you're thinking Yahoo.
Was it Yahoo? It was. You're right. It was Yahoo that did that.
Yeah. And I imagine they lost a lot of good people doing that, but they were probably thinking it's worth the price.
Okay. Yeah.
But was it? I don't know. In a lot of ways, people tend to be attracted to the cultures that they want to work at, especially for programmers.
Right.
Because
yeah.
we have more mobility than most workers. To be blunt, if you're a computer programmer that's even halfway good, you can work in any company you want to work at.
Right. Yeah.
Almost. Well, let me take that back. It's hard to get into Google. But you've got a lot of mobility. There's a lot of programming jobs out there, and it's easy to switch jobs.
Right. But
But
it seems like if you're a knowledge worker, developing within yourself the ability to work remotely part of the time that's almost like an essential skill now.
yes,
You might prefer to work from home or prefer to work in the office, but being able to work and be effective in either environment is it's almost a necessary skill in the workplace today.
Oh yeah, and it's definitely a skill. I mean, I've been doing it for a while anyway, but that one outfit I worked for, that was a fairly large corporation that was 100% remote. They never met together except for like twice a year. There was a real culture around it because it needed one. It needed a way of thinking that worked over remote.
Mm-hmm.
And it had some great things about it. It had some weird things about it too, though. There's nothing worse than politics by remote.
Well, there's nothing worse than politics local.
Right, but at least local, you could see it better. Someone's planning something that, it can get bad on remote. But
I'd be curious to see how Yahoo is now dealing with the current COVID crisis, having shut down so much of their remote work. I wonder if they're
who owns Yahoo at the moment. I've not followed up because they're a shell of a former company at this point.
Right. Yeah. All right. Research for next week.
Who owns Yahoo? Oh, I think it's Verizon.
That could be.
That sounds right. But they're not the king they once were. That's not the same thing over there. Yeah, and they were trying to get back to the water cooler effect, which is a very real thing. And you do absolutely lose some of that. In fact, one of the cultural things that I saw at that one company that was 100% remote is they forbade email. Email was not allowed because email is private. And they didn't mind you doing private over video when you're doing something synchronous, but anything async, in other words, it's a time delayed thing. They wanted it on a chat system where the whole company can learn from your conversation in different channels. It did mean that there was a lot of conversations on Slack.
Right.
You, in fact,
side conversations.
Oh, that too. Oh, it was insane. Well, I mean, they had special channels just for side conversations, but even then, those would bleed over into other channels, and literally there were thousands of channels, and you chose which channels you were going to belong to, because if you start subscribing to all of them, you'll never get any work done.
Right.
You literally
Yeah.
spend all day just listening to conversations from the whole company, and but in your particular channel, whatever section of the company you were working in, those back and forth conversations, you learned a lot from it. It was basically the water cooler,
Right.
and it's interesting. But
And I'm seeing the same thing with the open source development now as well, and that's been an interesting effect from the COVID lockdown. Is the open source world has always worked remote. You work for years without meeting the people that you're dealing with on a daily basis, and the effect of the lockdown has been more video chat and more semi face-to-face type stuff.
Yep. I thought I would never go back on the IRC ever again, but I've been, for various reasons, been shoved back into the IRC world because of because of all this. Because the various open source projects I'm working on, they use Gitter, or they use IRC, or some of the chat systems out there, and
IRC will never die.
well, it's like email. Email will never die. Even at that one company, despite the fact it was against the rules to email, HR still emailed. Because the lawyers made it happen. So, yeah. But yep, it'd be very interesting to see what happens over the next year, how companies change and shift. Because for a lot of folks, it's a proof of concept. Does that work? Yeah, it might work for a lot more people.
We'll figure it out, I guess.
Yeah, certainly saves on gas. I finally, this last week, filled my tank in my car. It's been 3 months since I put gas in my car.
And it's pretty cheap right now.
It is cheap. Well, yeah, that's the irony, is that I could have filled it up a bunch of times and I wouldn't have noticed because of the price. But no. In fact, you and I were talking about this personally a while back. I swear people are forgetting to learn how to drive.
Yes, they are. They're out of practice.
I'm trying
to give them some grace here, a little forgiveness. But they're the kindest thing I can say is that they're rusty. Yes.
Yeah. Collectively, we've lost a few levels in our driving skills. Oh, there we go. Okay. What's surprising is how fast that goes. I mean, I guess with the rule of thumb that habits are learned and lost in 90 days usually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I only have vague memories of what it's like to eat at a restaurant anymore, too.
I missed that one.
I do miss it. At least I think I do. I'll probably go back to it and go, what am I putting in my mouth? I don't know. I hope that's not what happens.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm willing to give it a try, though.
Yeah. I more than anything, I miss coffee shops.
Yep.
I used to, even though I talk about all this remote work in my separate office, I numerous times would go out to a coffee shop because I like the sound of the conversations that are around me that I'm not involved in, of course, because that would distract me if I actually cared what they were saying. That sounds rude when I say that out loud, doesn't it? But but I like the noise, the ambiance of it all. But,
right. Yeah.
And of course,
there's that casual that just going someplace and spending $3 and sitting down and looking at something that you don't look at all the time. There's a casualness to that it's there's a lot of parts of this COVID thing that have been surprising, that have turned out well. And I've talked to a lot of people, and they've liked it. They don't like everything. They certainly don't like people dying, and they don't like being restrictive. But they've, some people like cooking at home and didn't think that they would, or they liked exercising more and they've got a little bit more time to do it, or they like spending time with family, and that for one reason or another surprised them.
Yeah, well,
And
I'm reminded of my childhood days right now with my family.
right,
I mean,
yeah,
their heads aren't stuck in the screens all the time. They're playing outdoors, and I'm walking around the house casually sometimes, and it's like, this reminds me of, like, I'm showing my age, of the 70s and 80s
yeah.
before the internet.
Well, Friday night, my son came down. He's like, "Can I borrow the car?" I said, "Where are you going?" He's like, "We're going to a drive-in movie." And they all drove about 30 miles away and met up with friends and sat in the back of a truck and watched a movie in a drive-in.
Yeah,
Like, what is this, 1960?
yeah, well, I haven't thought about it, but that's social distancing right there.
Yes, it is.
Drive-in.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
I
drive-ins
bet
are.
there's another research topic for next week, but I bet drive-ins are making a killing right now.
Makes sense. Especially now that it's so easy to do micro transmissions for FM radio. So pretty much you have stereo sound in everyone's cars and stuff.
So note to us for prep for next week is let's look specifically for stories where of businesses that are winning, that are surprising businesses that have taken advantage of this.
Okay.
The drive-ins are one. The other one that I heard about this week was, we can look into it. Sonic is spending money like you can't believe, because Sonic restaurants are absolutely set up for kind of quarantine, and they're growing as fast as they can. They're throwing everything they can at it.
An extra sheet of plastic between the cars, and you've got like a super clean environment there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They're already socially distanced. They've got, basically takeout. They've got drive-up radios to call in your order. So yeah, they're apparently, like I said, they're throwing money at getting product, meat, supplies, and everything in place, and opening up stores as fast as they can.
Wow. Yeah, I could see that. On a related story to the last one, Slack has started stripping location data from photos being used. A little bit of background on this. When you take a picture with most phones, it stores not only the picture you took, but it also stores a lot more information than you probably want on there. It stores what time you took the photo, and because it's synchronized with the cell phone towers, it's accurate to within so many milliseconds. It knows exactly when you took that photo, and it knows exactly where you took the photo, because cell phones have GPS. So the metadata oftentimes has your GPS coordinates in it. So where you were and when you took it. It's like a form of evidence almost. At any rate, a lot of the larger social media sites like Facebook have learned some really shocking lessons from allowing this stuff to get out, and they strip automatically that information from your photos. Now, I should also point out, though, that Facebook specifically also keeps that metadata. Yeah, they don't strip it from themselves.
Right.
They just don't allow other people to see what that metadata is. But it's also partly how their facial recognition stuff works. Because if someone looks at a photo that's connected, it starts putting pieces together for the AIs. Anyway, that's off topic. But Slack is finally doing that, in part because of the heavy usage spike they've had because of COVID-19. There are companies out there that are doing quite well, Zoom being a well-known one, but actually quite a few of them are doing quite well. Slack being one of them, because it's a great way to chat online and theirs is more oriented towards companies to be used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
this one kind of surprised me that they weren't already doing this, because Slack has been a popular tool with the developer, with the nerd crowd for a long time. I was frankly surprised that Slack images were not already stripping out that metadata.
I guess my guess would be is they've not had their lesson learned in the background, because I have this suspicion that what happened was that at some point Google, with their photo system, had a photo shared on one of their social networks, and someone used it as a way to start doing something bad, like I don't know,
cyber stalking,
stalking or something like that, and it went to court. And that's where the executives at Google realized, wait, we are giving this stuff away to other people.
Right. Yeah.
And they went to their tech group and said, turn that off. Stop doing that. And my guess would be Facebook had the same thing. And
Right.
Slack, I guess probably because of the corporate emphasis, and that it's not the general public using it mostly. It's mostly companies in the past that were using it. It's more common for the public to use it now too. But
but you would think that after one or two, Facebook and Google and a couple of others have a problem or have a lawsuit, that any tech-oriented company of a certain size would learn from the mistakes of others.
Yeah,
and Slack is
agree.
not a they're not a small they're not a startup anymore.
Yeah, they're not a startup. Yeah, I am shocked too. Actually, I would think they would have. I would think of this already. They would already had to deal with this in court already. Right, frankly.
Yeah, you think. Yeah. So I guess the question that it raises is, who else is not stripping out data that should be?
Yeah.
Is Instagram, Twitter, every place that people upload images is
LinkedIn,
Craigslist. People put up images for Craigslist ads all the time.
Oh, it wouldn't take much to answer those very questions that we have. You can, for those who are curious how you do it, is if you get a photo, you can just, most image viewers on computers, download it to your local hard drive. So, right click on it, save image as, or you may have to do something else to make a copy of it. But once you have it on your hard disk, you open it up in your computer's local image viewer and choose properties. And sure enough, that's right where it is. It's called EXIF, Exchangeable Image File Metadata. And so it's not like a secret thing. It's not secret. It's just not well known.
Right.
But it is there. That's also where you can tell a resolution.
Somebody could write a spider or a bot that would,
crawl the
pull
net
images
for that
from popular websites and then just report whether or not there's EXIF data there.
I guarantee you someone has done that.
Yeah, probably.
And they're using it for various purposes right now.
Nefarious purposes.
Nefarious purposes. It sounds better when you say nefarious. Yeah.
All right, this is a very kind of fringy story that popped up on one of the open source sites this week. But Microsoft executive Brad Smith, Microsoft president, was speaking about open source software. And now Microsoft has a long history of being kind of anti-open source. And in fact, in the early 2000s, they were on record as calling open source and Linux particularly, they called it a cancer, and use a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt to try to steer users away from Linux and towards Windows, towards commercial software. But in the last few years, Microsoft has softened their stance a lot. They have started embracing open source software. And most recently, they purchased GitHub and now operate GitHub. And GitHub is, the repository of all open source software. And Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, had a quote where he said, in fact, Microsoft was on the wrong side of history on this, that they made a mistake. And that's I guess it's a little surprising to hear, somebody say we were wrong, we were wrong, we got that one wrong, and we came, but now we've amended our ways, and they're now very supportive of open source software. So it's not a big story, but it is I don't know, I found that telling.
Yeah. Well, and this kind of brings up a related story that I didn't have in my list of stories, but I don't know if you remember this, but in Germany, quite a few cities, and most notably Munich, Germany, switched to open source about 6 years ago. They started systematically getting rid of all of their proprietary operating system computers and switching to a version of Linux. Mm-hmm. The philosophy being that if the taxpayers are paying for the service, they should have access to what's being done, and that includes the operating system and its source code and all that type of thing. In fact, they had a distribution called actually I don't remember what it's called. It was a play on the word Munix or something like that. I don't remember. But apparently, soon after they did that and started systematically turning off all of their contracts with with Oracle and Microsoft, most notably, out of fear or what have you, basically Microsoft and Oracle went full-time lobbying down there, and they worked their tail off trying to get back into graces with Munich. Well, a year ago, they switched back. They said, we're getting rid of Linux. We're switching all back to Microsoft Windows. And about a month ago, a change in party happened at the leadership, and I don't know much about German politics. They're going back to Linux.
Okay.
But word on the street, though, is at this time it's not switching back. Apparently, they're switching back because they redid a lot of their internal software to be Linux. And when the move was shifting it over to Microsoft, apparently the pain was quite high. But don't get me wrong, the pain was high the first time they did it.
Yeah, well, pain is high anytime you're switching platforms.
Yeah, and now, and a lot of small cities kept doing it. It was Munich that did the reversal, and word on the street is this time, even if the politics changes again, that they'll probably never switch back this time around. They're going to stick with the Linux, and there are definite downsides for a city to do that because it makes certain softwares more difficult to run. Because in general, the rest of the world,
right.
most of the governments around the world still run under Windows, for better or for worse.
Well, the thing is, if what you want is features, and you want it right now, you can't beat commercial software. Commercial software is so fast at developing new stuff and addressing needs. But the flip side of that speed is that things go obsolete. And, when it comes to your government and speed isn't really what you want. What you want is stability. It's your government is taking care of your records and your history and your information, and you want that information to be protected and stable and predictable for decades, generations. So, I'd love to see them investing more in open source for the long haul. Let's build systems that last 100 years or 500 years and scale.
It's the same thing that happened in the server world for the cloud. It wasn't that the cloud was just biased towards Linux. It's that when you're setting up a system of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of computers that do repetitive, constant things over long periods of time, you don't want the latest bells and whistles. You don't want a keyboard that has flashing lights on it with some quick driver just written last week. You want it just to be stable.
Right.
And that's what Linux had. It was just straight stability. And that's especially in the server side of the world, because that's where people have been putting a lot of time and effort in slow, stable development.
Yep.
Linux servers just run for years upon years without rebooting.
Yep.
That's actually always been true to some degree. I remember this is the longest I've ever seen any machine run ever. One of my former workplaces, we had one of our secondary DNS servers ran for 6 years without rebooting. Because I remember, because when it finally did reboot, we had to do some kind of hardware upgrade. I went back to look in the logs, because the logs were unusually large. So I went back there and looked. It's like, oh my goodness, this thing's it's it hasn't rebooted in 6 years.
Well, that reminds me of it may be an apocryphal story, but it was from one of the universities, and they had a logging server that was running, and when it came time to do upgrades, nobody could find it, and it got down to the point of actually tracing wires, and they found a back office that had literally been drywalled off with a with a server. It was effectively a desktop machine, but it was running as a logging server that had been walled off in this room. I don't know if that's true or not. If somebody can find a link to that story, I'd love to see it again.
Yeah, that would be a proof of a stable machine, that because they were using it and didn't know where it was. And I gotta say, if you do it the server side where you don't have the graphical front end, it's just night and day. It's because even in the Linux world, as soon as you put graphics on it, I'm not sure what it is about that. It's just once it's a desktop,
right?
It's not quite as stable.
That's true. But command line only, and just sit there and tick along.
Just runs. This next story it's actually not a story like a press release or anything like that. It's just simply an announcement for the next Maker Faire. The next big one is May 23rd, 2020, coming up. And don't worry, you don't need to buy your airplane tickets for it. It's virtual, like most of the other things going on right now.
So this one, the byline on this story is it's featuring makers responding to COVID-19. And, this is a story that I have seen in every maker and every tech-related site out there. People getting involved in COVID-19 kind of community response, from making personal protective equipment or, face shields or respirator parts or whatever. And it seems to be, that's one of the universal things in this is the desire to either for makers to get involved, so the desire for makers to try to lend a hand, or the desire for community organizers to get that sector of the community involved one way or the other.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious to see what they were going to do with this Maker Faire. How many other efforts are out there besides the ones that we've heard about?
Yeah, and now some of this is probably the pretty predictable stuff, which is how can you help out, the medical community with the COVID-19 thing, and a lot of maker spaces have been helping out. Most commonly, the face shields, because they are relatively straightforward to produce. But there's other things too. But it looks like they're also trying to think about what's going to happen after the pandemic's over. In fact, one of the tracks is rethinking the future.
Did they give any kind of insight to what they mean by that?
Let's see. I can read right off the website here. How the pandemic and its response is teaching us to think differently, how, where, and why we do things, sustainability, food, and well-being.
Okay. So they're thinking community beyond the future as opposed to medical response beyond the COVID-19 crisis.
Right. How will this change how we do things? And is there a better distributed way to be doing things? If suddenly the global supply chain ever goes haywire again, is there a way to locally produce food or locally produce toilet paper?
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the things.
Although, do you think we'll run out of toilet paper again if we have another? I don't know.
Did we run out of toilet paper this time? I mean,
well, in the sense that we hoarded it, yes.
Right. Yeah. It was around. It was just not equally distributed.
Yeah. Yeah, because we didn't use more toilet paper.
Right. Well, I guess one of the things that was interesting in the medical response in getting the makers involved was there were some pretty explicit statements made by I'm trying to think back. There was one that was specifically made by someone in government, but the bottom line is they were saying, don't worry about liability. If you can help out, if you can, they wanted to address the reluctance of people to use their 3D printers to make PPE because people would be afraid that they'd get sued if they didn't do it right or something like that. Right. And so there was an intentional effort to address that and say, don't worry about that. Liability is a secondary consideration right now. The focus is the crisis that we've got. And as soon as they did that, and as soon as there was some assurance that, innovation and participation would be rewarded and accepted, people came out of the woodwork willing to help out. And it was kind of heartwarming to see the outpouring of people willing to get involved and offer up ideas and suggestions and innovations and so forth. And I know you need the legal protection, but it in many ways stifles innovation. So when they talk about rethinking the future, that's one thing I'd certainly like to hear is, how do you keep people innovating without making them, reckless?
Yeah. And is there, I don't have good answers for that kind of thing. Yeah, you don't want to be reckless. On the other hand, you don't want that fear factor riding over the top of you.
Exactly.
Helpful here is that in some ways it was just a perception of fear, because even if there's not a pandemic going on, if you voluntarily make something for not for profit and you give it to somebody and they use it voluntarily, knowing that you're an amateur, can you get sued? You can, but it's really hard to sue you in court in those scenarios, because if it's an act of good faith,
right? Yeah,
it's very different than if you're a company doing something as an ongoing basis as a for-profit venture. To do a one-off favor for somebody and then it not go right.
Right. And it isn't the real legal threat isn't the problem. The real problem is that people's fear of a legal threat, or just using that fear as an excuse to not get involved and to not participate or donate their time, or what you don't want to do is you don't want to suppress people's natural goodwill.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they'll answer all those questions and solve it all at the Maker Faire.
Yeah, that's good. It's like 2 days, maybe, right? How many? Yeah. Is this 1 day, 2 days? That's 1 day.
That should be plenty. You just do it over Zoom. You're good. Yeah, but no, actually, I may get. I'm not saying I'm getting involved because I got too much on my plate, but May 23rd, I may jump on and listen to a little bit of that. Let's see. That's actually that's before next week's show, isn't it?
I think so. So didn't Maker Faire go through was it a Chapter 13 or a Chapter 11 bankruptcy? I believe it was a major reorganization.
Yeah, some part of it basically fell apart, but I don't know what that means in the grand scheme of things.
Well, I'm glad to see them keeping it going, especially in these tough times.
Once again, thanks for listening to the latest and greatest in tech news and other stories. Thanks for listening. You all have a safe week.